Hello and welcome to today's 27th webinar in the On the Move webinar series, Drive Real Business Results with IIoT Adoption, brought to you by Honeywell Intelligrated. I'm Tracy Niehaus, Director of Marketing for Honeywell Intelligrated, and I'm your moderator today. We have just a few announcements before we begin. Please note that this presentation's audio is provided by phone number or through your computer sound system, so be sure to turn up your computer's volume. You may ask an online question at any time throughout today's presentation in the Q&A feature along the bottom of your screen. Simply type your question into the text area and hit send. Questions will be addressed at the conclusion of the presentation, with the exception of technical questions that can be asked and will be answered real time. Please note that we recommend that you be hardwired when attending this webinar. A Wi-Fi connection may result in lag time in slides updating and graphics loading. Today's webinar will include polling questions. Please feel free to answer these questions when they appear on your screen, and be sure to click submit so we can include your response, as we will be sharing the results real time during this live event. If you'd like to revisit key sections of today's webinar, it will be available on demand at intelligrated.com/on-the-move approximately 48 hours after this live event. You will also receive an email in a couple of days with a link to the recorded event. Now on to the presentation, Drive Real Business Results with IIoT Adoption. Discussing today's topic will be William Leet, our Senior Product Marketing Specialist for the Connected Distribution Center here at Honeywell Intelligrated. William helps shape the future of the distribution center, material handling, and warehouse industries through Honeywell Intelligrated's Industrial Internet of Things, IIoT, offering, the Connected Distribution Center. He is responsible for supporting customers in their digital transformation and IIoT initiatives. William has 6 years of experience in the building automation and energy management industries, working with small buildings, and 2 years in the industrial automation industry, helping design Industry 4.0 enabled machines. And with that introduction, the webinar will now begin.
All right, thanks, Tracy. Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us here. This is going to be some of the learning objectives that we have here, but the goal is to understand the financial impacts of IoT. So I put together a presentation just to express, based on my experience, what I've learned about it, what I see as successful, and hopefully you guys can walk away with at least some idea of how to set some goals, have a strategy and process around some adoption, and learn some of the best practices that we've seen. Maybe think about how you approach IoT a little bit differently. So with that, let's get into it. I don't want to leave anybody behind who may be new to IoT and what it is. So real quick, we'll kind of review what IoT is. You may also hear the words digital transformation, going digital. These are the kind of terminology you might hear out in the industry. And essentially, we're taking what was once a physical system, so in this case, a phone. You digitize it, so now they had digital phones that were wireless. And then as I digitalized that new digital phone that I had, it gets new functionality. So I now have my Rolodex, my calendar, my maps, all that information is now available on this new device. I'm kind of adding new operation to what a phone was. In fact, it's hardly fitting we call it a phone anymore. I think people hardly use the phone app. And then finally, there's out of that software, the functionality it provides some insights about how I'm using the phone. So I actually have a Garmin watch that I carry around, and there's certain wearables people have. It'll tell me on Thursdays, you need to complete 20 more minutes of exercise to close your rings, or that's your weakest day of the week, and we suggest doing this type of activity to catch up. So this is the kind of digital transformation journey we see happening. You've probably already seen it for the music industry, getting to Spotify from old vinyl records, or you've maybe seen it with great success for Netflix coming from the movie industry, or a company that didn't do it so well would be Blockbuster. But a lot of companies now, this is a high priority because it's the way the industry is moving, and there's more value coming out of the software side and insights from a physical system and being able to sensorize it. So from a basic IoT architecture, I have 2 locations here. They may have several assets involved with them. And what I want to be able to do is have sensor level information or information from their PLC, However, I can collect data from different buildings, different locations, different devices, different assets, collect that all in one location and storage. You hear that called the cloud. And up there in the cloud, I can perform advanced analytics. I can deploy machine learning. I can benchmark against different data, compare different assets across different parts of my enterprise, visualize what those are, and be able to make improvements based on that information. So fundamentally, we're going to talk about one of the main features of being able to get connected and use that data is I'm able to track asset health and perform predictive maintenance with that information. In the same way that my watch kind of tells me how healthy I am, what's my heart rate variability, it also tells me, what other activity I can do to improve my exercise or train for my cycling events, right? So here we have a performance over time curve. This is just an example of a bearing, but this could be any asset. This could be a bike, this could be your sortation system, this could be your HVAC, this could be any of those systems, right? But with time, the performance falls off exponentially. And usually an intervention to that system doesn't happen until I hear audible noise or there's something physical I can hear about it. And for different preventative maintenances, maybe I intervene at a certain cadence of time before that noise happens. But again, further up in the curve, I'm still losing performance before I'm aware of any kind of issue that's happening there. So now that we just covered quickly what IoT is, I do have a poll for you. I want to understand, everybody that's on the line here, what is your level of IoT adoption? And I'd like you to provide what you guys think best fits where your company is, and I'll contrast what that looks like for the rest of the industry based on a material handling industry study. But I'd like to see everybody else here on the phone where they lie. So we'll give it a couple more seconds here. I've got, maybe 15 responses or so. I'll give you another 10 seconds here, and then we'll close the poll. All right. I see we're still missing a few people. All right, here we go. So we'll share results here. All right, so it looks like a lot of people have an initiative, but there's not a strategic plan or well-defined goals, which you guys are going to see is probably pretty typical of what we see for customers that we're working with, but also in the industry. And I do have one person who has successfully executed against my IoT plan and demonstrated positive measured results, which is awesome. That's good to hear. So we'll show you what the material handling industry world had said in theirs. So these actually line up pretty closely with the responses that I saw that you guys provided here as well, right? So if I take a look at these results, I'm seeing, number one that scares me is the strategy piece. So people know it's important. We've heard of IoT, but the part that scares me is only about 20% of those people actually have kind of a clear plan or actionable goals around it, right? So what it says is, we know it's important. I don't know if I have the resources to do it, but I don't know if I've put a plan in action yet to be able to address all of those issues yet. So the majority of companies, they say it's important, but no goals, no active vision for it. And that's kind of along the lines of the polling that you guys provided there as well. And as far as barriers to adopting it, these are also from material handling industry. These are the top barriers to adoption. And I wanted to point out, it really falls off after number 3 there, the percentages. So my top one there is a lack of understanding of the technology. Second is a lack of talent to effectively implement the technology. And third becomes this lack of a clear business case to justify the investment. We're going to talk a little bit about each of these and how they affect customers that are trying to evaluate IoT projects. And, I have some strategy and best practices around how to get around these, right? So if I was to look at currently, I see 2 groups of customers, and I either have my fast adopters who have seen all the marketing hype and they're so excited to use IoT and they have an idea of, hey, here's the potential benefits, here's everything I can do. But really in the market, there's probably 350 different IoT competitors that are there. Very difficult to differentiate what the offering is between sensor companies, cloud companies, OEMs, and there's no standardization around what really that offering is. There's a lot of buzz and all of the evolving offerings out there. There's new businesses entering the market, new competitors. There's competitors leaving the market that aren't sustainable as startups. So some things go unsupported. What I usually see happen is my hairs have awareness. They start a trial, and it might be a free trial or the lowest risk trial I can get my hands on to start getting my IoT initiative as quickly as possible. And then it either works or it doesn't work, which might be kind of an emotional feel about it. So I maybe implement and say, well, it feels like it didn't quite work well, but I don't have a metric to tell me. So there's no success metric, there's no way to measure against it. And I end up repeating the process quickly again. I go try the next free trial I can get my hands on, or the next limited risk trial. And I end up in this continuous circle that's very difficult to break free of. On the other side, I have my slow adopters who they're aware of the technology out there. They see the hype, but they're not going to be the first adopter. They want to have the technology vetted out and deployed somewhere else. They don't want to be the last one, but they still want to make sure it's a viable option before they participate. But they end up getting in an endless loop of continuously evaluating what the offering might do for them, and waiting for the market to mature. So they say, I see where it is now, but maybe in 3 years we'll consider something like this once it's more mature. But the problem is there's companies now and their competition are actively using this technology and seeing benefits, so they're falling behind. So these are the two kind of extremes I see for different groups of customers adopting IoT technology. And I wanted to do a poll and just see, where do you guys lie between those two types? Are you more of the hare? Are you more of the tortoise? Do you think your approach to it is more balanced? Or if you were someone that didn't have an IoT initiative yet, then you may not, it may be non-existent for you. All right, we'll give it another 5 or 10 seconds here to let everybody fill it out, and we'll share the results on what best describes our level of IoT adoption, or describes our method of IoT adoption. All right, we'll end polling here and share results. Okay, so we do have some people who are honest about saying they're overeager or slow to embrace change, and it's just as I expected. There's probably about an even split we're seeing. I'm sorry for the people that said it's non-existent, but we're here to help, so we'll come up with a plan here. And then I'm glad to see that some people recognize that, hey, I do need to be conservative, but I can't be left behind. So we'll go through what I recommend as a process that I've seen successful in the building automation industry, and kind of we'll go through each step of what that process looks like. So here is an innovation process. I call it the HORTISE approach. There are elements of this process that can be done quickly, where the people who are quick adopters are going to succeed a little faster, and I see the slow adopters are going to be stronger at other parts of the process. So we're going to go through each piece of this, but understand the beginning part of it. I recommend being more cautious and understanding, and spending a lot of time to set yourself up for success. And then once you have some success, rapidly deploying and scaling to beat your competitors to get that benefit. So we'll go through each stage of the process here, just starting with awareness. So as I mentioned before, there's a lack of understanding of that business technology. So there's 350 or more IoT competitors. I see the number going up every day. How the heck am I supposed to differentiate? And if I was just to give you the same experience of what it looks like now, if I had never seen Microsoft Word before and it was a new technology being introduced, how would I differentiate a Microsoft Word from, I guess it's just Notepad. I don't know if Microsoft makes it, but there's a Notepad app on your computer you would use as well. Or maybe my status quo is just writing in a journal manually. If I had to go to my senior leadership and present which one of these technologies we proceed with, I'm able to write in all of these applications. I'm able to copy. I'm able to paste. I can spell check in each of them. Even with the journal, I can use a thesaurus, or I can use a dictionary and word modify as needed to. And if I looked at Word, it's a subscription compared to a journal, which might be a first cost. So how on earth would I even justify Microsoft Word to someone that was going to approve this project or not? What's even the payback on something like Microsoft Word? And those are the same kind of questions people are asking of IoT services that they're seeing out in the industry. And you see this again. Here's another example. If I talk about the music industry, right? Everyone's kind of moved to try ours in some form of a trial, and that seems to be one of the only ways to be able to differentiate all those competitors in the marketplace. And I can say, at least for me personally, I didn't pick one of these music services on my phone, install it, and decide that is my one app that I use. I end up using multiple of these apps, and other people that I talk to, they probably have Spotify, they probably have Pandora and YouTube, all of these on their phone, right? So I suggest that the solution may not be just one particular business. It's worth trying to find out what is the experience that's different between each of the softwares. It's not like comparing conveyor, where I can look at spec sheets and compare throughput rates and performance. It's a much more difficult comparison, and I need to be able to try each of these to understand what the experience of using that software is. So typically we recommend some kind of trial. We see failure for free trials because there's usually no skin in the game. There's no responsibility. If I fail to use the software, there's no encouragement, to continue using it. No accountability. It just goes and I'll go get the next free software, right? It kind of repeats that cycle of we saw for the hair. So at least for us, we might do a different trial depending on the circumstances, but it's also important to understand for your business, what is the duration of the trial that's going to allow you to succeed? Maybe yours is 6 months, maybe yours is a year, but definitely defining what a trial is going to look like is going to be incredibly important, and it's usually important to share risk in what that trial looks like. Again, a free trial, we've seen very little success for customers adopting just free software. There's no accountability for it. So the next part in the cycle is choosing a team, and we see this rolling up as kind of the second barrier to adoption, which is a lack of adequate talent to effectively implement. And part of this shows up much later in the adoption process, that you usually had somebody you didn't include in the original ideation of how you were going to use the technology. So first off, I want to understand, for everybody there, we're going to do a poll about how many people do you have on your IoT team initiative, if you have one. And if you don't, it's probably just you, and you might be the one person. Okay, results are starting to come in, and I'm seeing, oh man, someone's got 10 plus, a couple. Yeah, one person's got 10 plus. That's impressive. That's good. All right, we'll end polling here in about 5 or 10 seconds and share the results. All right. Okay. So majority of people, either it's just themselves or they're just kind of early on in this process, it seems like, and maybe a couple people have started to involve a couple people on their team, which is good to already start branching out. But I'm wondering if that person that has the 10 people or the 7 to 10 there was someone that reported that they had the successful IoT initiative, because that's definitely a theme here. It's really going to take more than just 1 or 2 or 3 people. I think 3 is really your minimum. So this is just generally for an innovation team. There's someone that's the visionary of how this technology is going to get used. Someone is the motivator and coach, and so they're trying to get people excited and making sure people, are using and complying with what the process looks like. And then someone's actually executing on this. So, in our example for our industry, someone might be at corporate level, the visionary of how multiple sites could use IoT technology. Motivators and coaches may be operations or your GM of your DC. An executor is usually your preventative maintenance team. It can involve, there's several different people that would be involved in implementing the different insights that we see. But there is one other piece missing, that is, we saw in an insight from Forbes that 66% of people are actually including external vendors in their planning team. So I do see more success with innovation groups that engage early with their trusted vendors to be able to put together a plan. And it also probably saves you from later on down the line having a salesperson just pitching you a commercial of what their product was, if they're earlier on able to engage and understand what we think the business outcomes will be. As part of choosing that team, it is worth looking at different people from different generations who had different views of the technology. I think that certain people are a little bit scared of what IoT means, and I'd give the example of I have a friend who he's afraid of the government maybe spying on where his parked car is, right? So when Google tells him you parked your car here, it's 40 feet away, and how was your trip to Quiznos Subs? Well, how would you rate it on Google, right? He's a little worried that everyone's spying on what he's doing. Meanwhile, his daughter's like, this is excellent. I don't have to remember where my car is at all. I can ask Siri where it is. Siri listens to what I say, and I'm easily able to get the functionality I desire. Other generations may see this type of automation as a threat. So I have Homer Simpson up there, right? People taking over his job. They see it as something that tries to replace them with automation. Meanwhile, if I go to a younger generation, someone that's a newer technician, and they're looking at all the technology available that IoT provides, they see it as Iron Man's, AI assistant, Jarvis, right? So they see the benefit of, man, this thing helps me do my job so much better rather than replacing what I'm doing. So it is important to understand you may run into barriers of different generational differences within your company, and I think it's important to populate your team with people that are from different generations, have different views of IoT technology, not just the people that are going to be closest to it. So if I look at our team that we propose, this is for our connected distribution center. I think I did something maybe a little bit similar with building automation side when I was in that industry, but I do have at least two to three people that are doing the execution on the customer side. They have a visionary, they have their coach and mentor, but then from our support side, there's a huge number of people that go into this from different categories, right? So this, again, if I'm including my external vendor that I'm partnering with on my IoT team, I'd really expect a successful project to have, between 7 and 15 different people engaged for successful adoption. So this may come as a surprise to some of you that we're at 2 or 3, but at least this might give you insight into who else should be on this team that we're working with. And I have some ways to kind of summarize who should be on that team. So we're going to look at the evaluation stage of this next. A big part of that evaluation stage is looking at number 3, which would be lack of a clear business case to justify that investment, right? What is the payback on Microsoft Word in that example I shared earlier? So I can tell you up front, the Department of Energy says, yes, there's obviously a business case to do this, and they provided some generic savings, but this was from 2010. I would say that the energy industry has adopted this much quicker. So probably they've been using it for about 10 years. Buildings have probably been using it for about 7, and only recently now it's kind of coming to automation, distribution, material handling. So it's been much easier for them to adopt this. I think they have some constraints, or we have some additional constraints with what we do with distribution, but as far as the energy world, it's pretty clear cut because you're measured by your energy bill. Where here it's much more difficult to summarize what the potential benefits are applying to something as complex as a distribution center. And what we do see is it's important to understand what those potential benefits are, even before trying to understand what the cost of IoT might be. It's important to understand, is this a viable technology? Is there enough benefit to even warrant the time to investigate? And we do see that from a McKinsey study that 75% of the leaders of IoT adoption are 75% more likely to cite preparation of business case, some kind of financial model that they can measure against in success of their IoT initiative. So what we did for distribution centers, and this is kind of the modeling I recommend everybody to sit down and be able to look at the different impacts to their business, is I tried to build a model, and it usually breaks down into cost avoidance. What risks can I avoid by being predictive? How can I predict something that's going to fail preemptively? If I look at inventory, I usually have that as a risk mitigation factor. I should be able to reduce inventory. There might even be some intangible costs. If I avoid downtime, that should make people less stressed out. They're not responding to putting out fires. Some of those may be difficult to estimate, but there's still a factor in rolling up to what the total benefit is, right? So this was a model I put together for distribution center that we actually built into an Excel tool to try to understand for each distribution center what these look like. I do have continuous improvement side of it, which is more productivity. If I'm maintaining and avoiding downtime, I should be able to get more product out the door quickly and at lower cost. So I should be able to quantify that, and that's much easier to measure than the intangible will be further down the line. But this exercise was important to understand. Let us map all the benefits, because I need to know who is going to be missing from my team. This helps me check and say, here are the potential results I think I can get, but also if I break down the pie of all the benefits I think I can go get, does my innovation team reflect all the people that'll be there? So we've seen, you usually have the operations side, you have maintenance side, inventory. Someone is also responsible for reporting. Do I capture a person on my team for every part of the business this can potentially impact? So we've done some modeling with customers before. This is what our report generated out based on our financial tool that we have. So if I'm going to present this technology, like Microsoft Word, I need to understand what the financial outcomes will be, right? And this one's kind of a unique case where, you know, the potential for these guys is a really high benefit. I think this one is, even being conservative, this was kind of a slam dunk that they should continue forward with their IoT initiative. So we're able to, you know, qualify ahead of time and say, yeah, absolutely, this type of technology is fully functional for your business. And we broke out with this customer. We were able to investigate what are all the parts of the businesses this is going to affect, right? So for a distribution center, it's lost margin from product that wasn't going to be able to go out the door, missed track reduction, jammed reduction, no reads, bad gap, intangible costs. They only gave me $4 for that one, but to some people, I've seen them actually add $42,000 because it would avoid reporting to their senior manager. They had to compile a weekly report. So some of it's a little bit entertaining, but you do have to be a little bit creative to understand how the technology gets applied. But setting this financial model up front is extremely important so you can validate your results on the back end. We see most customers don't do this, and you end up getting stuck in that. You don't have alignment to really drive why we're doing this, right? The why behind why are we taking on this way of doing something different. Most of you have probably heard of SMART goals, but I'm wondering, you know, is that a starting place a lot of you have done when looking at your IoT initiative? Some of you said, you know, we don't have a strategic plan. This is just a pretty basic exercise to understand a starting point. But I need to set goals for how this is going to work. And part of that is I need to be specific. So having a financial model of how this is going to work and who specifically on my team is going to be able to execute the who, what, when, where, why discussion. Is it measurable? Financials are pretty measurable. That's real impact to the business. There are, like I said, some intangible costs, but those aren't without a reach of estimating those. And can I actually achieve those results? Do I have a team to implement that? Does this make financial sense? And what timeline do I plan to implement? Some people have a 3 to 5 year plan. We've seen some people are just, hey, in 1 year, I want to try at least a couple different attempts at the technology. The next part of the stage is just starting small. We see that it's usually cost prohibitive for any IoT technology to out the gate, go and implement at every device, every asset, all across the enterprise. So what I need to understand is I'm not going to try to take on something that's totally unreasonable that I wouldn't succeed at. I need to find something where I can start small, low risk, introduce the technology, and understand if it works. And need to be able to prove it, right? I don't want to jump on the double black diamond. I need to start on the beginner slopes. Now, on the other side of that, I also need to pick a scope of a start small that is big enough to make an impact, right? If I'm going to start a snowball rolling down a hill, it can't be a snowflake. I've got to build some size of a snowball to start rolling it to be able to have something at the end. So for us, if I'm looking at distribution centers, I look at my most critical systems that are there. So we defined what a sortation critical path might look like. If I had a sortation system, this is where I'd want to start. It's the highest value. It's the most critical to my system. If there's anywhere that's going to prove value, it's probably here. The other challenge becomes, do I implement this on one sorter? Do I implement on multiple sorters? Depending on, you know, what team I have available, what is the size, how many of these distribution centers should I implement at to get proof of concept? I see some customers, it's a limited version of the software across multiple sites. They're testing from an enterprise level. And then I've also seen it where they test at one site, but they use the full-blown technology to vet at a single site. And so I've seen somewhere in between where people pick 2 or 3 of their critical assets, their sortation, and they benchmark them against each other. All 3 methods I've seen succeed. I don't know that there's one better than the other, but it's important to determine what start small path is going to work for me. This is probably the most difficult part of the process, is actually proving what the results are. I need to have something more than just a feel whether this actually worked, whether measurable results. What were the indirect results? What did I not anticipate in my model? What sensitivities in the model changed? Did my throughput change during the year and I didn't see the benefits? And then I needed to review what challenges that we had. So some of the challenges may not be, they may not kill what your IoT initiative could be. They could be addressed, but now you're able to recalibrate and start small again. As far as lessons from the building energy industry, so it was very easy to set those financial goals because you have an energy meter, and that's very easy to find a blended rate and understand very roughly what the benefit of my energy saving project was. Very straightforward. And most energy companies put energy meters on your building to bill you correctly anyway, so the data is readily available. We also saw, a lot of other third-party ways to evaluate and set goals. So there's, Energy Star, they do the portfolio manager. I have an Energy Star score, LEED certification for my building, for new systems and ongoing. So very simple to implement from a building energy standpoint and measure what the results are. And it is important to note, I think it's a little bit funny, I have our Honeywell thermostat on there, but if I compare a traditional thermostat to a Nest thermostat, those are potentially both IoT devices I'd be able to control from my phone. The Nest thermostat in some cases actually uses more energy than a traditional thermostat. With a long-term business case is actually it's a harder piece of, or a more complex piece of technology. So the life cycle cost was actually higher in some comparisons. So I'm not saying just because it's new and shiny, IoT is always gonna work for you. There may be some cases that it's not going to, right? But a lot of people will buy it because it is the new and shiny, but it's important to set that financial goal to measure whether it is or not. As far as actually measuring how the results were, I have examples, where we've predicted some failures. It's very easy to show a benchmark of how we've improved error rates, but if I were to pick some intervention that we predict either a gearbox or motor failure, it's very difficult to estimate the useful remaining life of that equipment. But I still need to take some credit for it. Otherwise, I leave that out of my summary of understanding what the total benefit was. I might choose not to renew based on some of the hidden benefits that are happening at my site if I just haven't quantified them or put a number to them. So we see people that are able to effectively benchmark, and you can quantify what error rates do improve and bring to the bottom line. As far as catching predicted failures like a motor, it's usually sitting down and just calculating what do I think relatively this was cost, even if I'm conservative about it, to help understand if this is a viable business case. And then finally, to complete the cycle is just understanding when to reinvest. So if I have gone through starting small and I did prove value, then this should continue to accumulate value for me as it's deployed, right? So if I've started small, now I prove what additional revenue I'm generating from this, I should be able to reinvest that now. Now I can expand the scope of my IoT project. I should be able to scale, include additional sensors that would have been otherwise not justifiable for starting small, or I can deploy at multiple other sites with different assets. But once I know and I can take credit for how much I've saved, now I can start claiming, hey, let's go after this other site. Here's how much I've saved. Let's start the process again here. So part of that reinvesting is understanding that each site and each asset is going to be different. Like I said, you can connect so many things. I came from the building automation world and energy management side. At some point, all these different parts of your business will end up converging. So understanding how those might play together. Also understanding each site is a little bit different. So this is just a representation. What should my IoT plan look like, for an equivalent site, a smaller site? What about a site that's going to scale and add new assets? How do I justify that and measure that success? And then what's my plan for future locations? And one observation here too is just we see better IoT adoption actually on newer systems going in because I don't have to disrupt the status quo of how people do maintenance or how they perform operations. It is actually slightly more challenging for an existing system. So there is a little bit of a different approach and understanding how I might scale something that I've proved that is successful. But I need to have a game plan for kind of each of the sites that I have there. So just in summary, here are some of the best practices for IoT adoption. Solve a problem that someone cares about, which is I need to have some kind of goal in mind that I can quantify. I need to have a conservative model of what is this financially going to do for me is this really going to work out? I need to be able to have some flexibility to change my processes. I need to pick some kind of partner. We see, again, 2/3 of our customers are partnering with an external vendor on their IoT team, and I need to bring in outside resources to help consult. And the other part is just addressing the change management side. How is my team going to be able to adopt this? Can I present and articulate the vision and the financial benefit to them so that they're aligned with trying to succeed in the project? And then, part of it is, I guess, every millennial has their inspirational quote at the end of an email. Mine is just the inspirational quote at the end of the PowerPoint. But I do foresee customers who are more adaptive to change will be more successful in implementing IoT. And you may not succeed the first time around, but that process is intended to be iterative. So that's currently the process that we employ today, and I've seen succeed in 2 other industries. Maybe it may make sense. It may seem very simple, but in execution it can be a little bit challenging. So that's just our strategy for understanding IoT adoption and the top barriers and how our process maybe addresses some of those. I'd like to hear from you guys if you have some questions about where you've used this technology, what barriers you've run into, and what advice you might be looking for from us, or just questions about the technology in general. But I'll open up the floor to anyone who'd like to ask questions.
All right. Thanks very much, William. We appreciate that presentation. Very informative. And as mentioned, we're now going to move on to the Q&A portion of our event. As a reminder for our attendees, you can ask a question online throughout the presentation if you haven't already, or here at the conclusion of the presentation in the Q&A feature along the bottom of your screen. We do actually have quite a few questions that have come in, I think probably interesting, given what the feedback was on the polling question about those that are attending that already had some sort of an IoT initiative in place, with 47% of those respondents saying that they had an initiative but didn't have plans. I think that's probably where a lot of these questions are coming from.
Okay.
So I will go ahead and get started, and we'll see what we can get through here. All right, so first question is, how long does it take to set up a successful IIoT program?
Sure, great question. So implementation is, average sensors, you have some amount of lead time to be able to get sensors. Most people have them in inventory. We see all of the sensor hardware can probably get set up basically within a week or so. It does take time for someone to implement the technology or spin up the software. That may take another week. Those are small pieces of time in comparison to the amount of time it actually takes for the change management. So again, that's why that trial piece does address, we see some customers who are quicker to use the technology, have more experience, more mature in their path, are able to do it in 6 months. And then I have other people who are still not there, and it's well over a year in. I think the human element of how am I adopting the technology, who's coaching me on the change, is the longest part of being able to use the technology.
Okay, I guess that sort of feeds in nicely to the next question. We have an attendee who's asking, can you give some examples or ways that companies can start small?
Yeah, so I think from the building world, we would actually just start small. If you had a chilled water system, we would basically look at the critical assets there, chillers, cooling towers. From an energy management side, it was very simple because the whole building was on an energy meter, so it's very easy to start small with the information presented there. The examples we've seen for starting small with our customers here at Honeywell is, again, we recommend looking at sortation outbound critical path is definitely the primary asset for a lot of distribution centers. That's one where we've seen a return pretty quick, and they're able to start scaling to other systems that they have. I think part of it's stepping back and saying, what things cause me the most pain? What things am I trying to reduce the amount of downtime for? What impacts my big business the quickest? And those are usually good symptoms of places to start. So probably just a handful of sensors and a good team around it.
Okay, let's see, next question. I think that we're all in our jobs that, sort of challenged with KPIs, and one of our questions here is around KPIs. I mean, can you maybe speak to some of the KPIs that, you've seen companies measure in this adoption?
Sure. For our customers, I see people that are well in their process are usually tied to some kind of downtime initiative. From the industrial automation world, that's kind of represented with your OEE. And I think the quality component of that doesn't exactly show up in distribution centers, so it normally gets reported as downtime or uptime. The way it currently happens now is I have a metric that was, I think, 80% of businesses misestimated by 200 to 300%. There's a manual process to report all of that. So downtime we see is pretty much the biggest initiative, and then each asset will have its own set of KPIs that I'm concerned operationally with. So gap errors, read rates, throughput, those all become critical KPIs if I'm looking at the system level.
Okay, great. Okay, we have an attendee asking here, looks like they're facing some challenges getting their IT group, giving them approval to get connected. And could you share any strategies that would be helpful to expedite this process?
Yeah, absolutely. So with this type of technology, at some point you will have to engage your IT department to get connected. We see more success when that happens early on, when you can align over the business case. If I look at someone who's failed before, they waited until the last minute, right before implementation, then they went to their IT guy and said, hey, can we get the network dropped? And that halted right there. Customers that were successful engaged early on, presented the alignment, said, hey, this might save us several $100,000. Can you help us get there? And I think you're seeing a change where normally what IT's word was is kind of holy, and they get a little bit of special treatment, right? They kind of dictate what happens. I've seen it shift now where people are kind of, they've become more customer service oriented. My discussion with IT now is, hey, how can you help us, rather than do we have permission to do this? And this type of technology, I guess the magic words are usually outbound only communication. That's most IoT technologies. If you're connecting elevators, fire alarm systems, building systems, most all of it is outbound only communication. There isn't quite a great way developed for two-way communication yet. So you see a lot of SCADA systems on-premise that are two-way, that are within the network. But as far as IoT going up to the cloud, most technologies are outbound only communication.
Okay, just looking at some of these questions, I think I'm going to sort of combine three, but I mean, I can remind you of them, okay, all around data. So, so the questions are, what kind of data are these systems collecting? Do you have an opinion regarding on-site data collection versus permanently installed continuous monitoring equipment? And what if I don't want to share my data? So they seem like they could maybe be grouped together. I don't know if a common answer is best, but.
Yeah, I may circle to the last one about sharing there.
Okay.
As far as the first two, just what metrics should I really measure? We see that only about 25% of data that people are collecting actually gets utilized. So it's important to understand, in that start small strategy, I don't want to collect data for the sake of collecting data or just increasing how much data I have. I need to have a measurable objective there. For a sorter, any asset, I usually pull control system information. So I have the PLC that's available from the existing asset. But I also am able to field mount different sensors. So in the case of a sorter that we have for that critical path, I'm interested in knowing what is my power that's going to all of my motors. I put a motor vibration temperature sensor on there, maybe even, I'd probably look at maybe even the sound of the motor and everything attached to it. So I have field sensors that I'm installing, but then I also need to contrast that with what's the operational state of that system. So I pull PLC data to find, what's my data on different errors that are generated, what is the performance of that system, what are the throughputs, and I need to understand the key metrics off of that PLC. And I think there's like 6 million tags potentially on a PLC. I really need to narrow down which ones are going to be valuable to me. And then I think having the cloud functionality is more important to start small and be able to scale. It is sometimes easier to start small if I have an on-premise system, but that has to be supported internally by my IT department. And if I wanted to rapidly scale that across different sites because I have success, I'm a little bit limited in how quick I can get that without having to do a little bit of extra work. And as far as being uncomfortable with maybe sharing data, I do see some customers are very protective of their data. They want to be the only ones that use it, or any information or any analytics that get developed with it, they want to have ownership of it. And that attitude is a little bit anti-collaborative. So what ends up happening is if I have other people in the market, 3 other competitors equal to my size who are willing to collaborate and share their data anonymously, they're going to be able to have a much more powerful tool than I'll be able to develop myself. So we see it as a matter of collaboration. Someone that isn't as collaborative is going to be slower to adopt the technology, and they probably don't have as much data at their disposal.
Okay, fair enough. Recommendation about wired or wireless sensors. Sorry about that. Just sensors.
Sure. So I've been asked that probably a couple times, what are the right sensors to install? And we see a lot of wireless sensors as a new technology coming out there. And I think in some instances they make sense, but I don't have a favorite between the two of them. I think in most cases it's nicer to have a hardwired system so you don't have to change batteries. But if I'm implementing a new system and I have something way up in the ceiling that's hard to get to run power to, that's an absolutely awesome application for some wireless systems. From a brand new building perspective, we would debate between whether you put in a wired thermostat or wireless thermostat, and it was really just dependent on what part of the building am I in, how easy is it to run power, how easy is it to service this or replace batteries. So I think it's a consideration that it's probably some combination of the two. I don't need to pick one or the other. It's just what's going to be the lowest cost implementation between the two, and to be able to service.
Okay. I'm not sure what this means, but hopefully you can decipher it. How do you work across different systems?
Sure. I think they're probably talking about, it probably just means working with other third-party systems is what I'm going to kind of take that.
Oh, gotcha. Okay.
So everybody, I've seen, they kind of have a museum of a collection of different systems, different ages, different vendors. It's kind of a hodgepodge of different things that are out there. And kind of a recent development in the industry now is most PLCs, probably in the past 5 to 7 years, the Rockwells, the Siemens, everybody that makes a PLC, they've included what they call an OPC server. So that's open protocol communication. It's an open standard, which is probably different from just other communication systems like Ethernet IP, which is just an open protocol. You see it in the building automation world where BACnet exists. So they've standardized on an open protocol that allows you to communicate up to the cloud. So I've seen the same. You'll see it at the lower sensor level at IO-Link. You'll see it on PLCs is already built in, having OPC functionality. And any cloud system now will be able to look at that OPC, which is specifically developed for cloud communication. So that's a new enabling technology. Historically, PLCs wanted to keep their proprietary different communication protocol, but customers have demanded that they've moved towards a standard supported communication protocol.
Okay. Let's see. Are there cases where IIoT doesn't make sense? That's an interesting question.
Yeah, that's true. There are cases where it isn't going to make sense. I mean, there's a lot of hype around it. Clearly on very critical systems, much larger systems, where there's, I absolutely can't have downtime and I can easily, see what the benefits look like. That's where it absolutely makes sense. But there are cases where IoT doesn't make sense. There's kind of a funny YouTube video that I actually shared around with our team, which someone actually made a robotic pen that was voice activated and had IoT capabilities, right? And it's a little bit of a joke, but there is a lot of market hype, so it may not make sense for you, but it's understanding out the gate, is this going to make a financial case that I can measure to or not? So there's applications I've seen where it doesn't make sense. That Nest thermostat, like I said, there was some research on, I'm not saying it works for everybody, but for a couple buildings, it was more expensive to have a Nest thermostat than it was a traditional thermostat, programmable thermostat.
So it's really on a case-by-case basis, right?
Yeah.
Okay, all right.
Yeah, and I wouldn't tell, everyone that's on here that has a distribution center, it may not be for you, but, that's part of looking at that financial model. That's why we built a tool to see if it makes sense or not.
Okay. Well, I think we've wrapped up most of our questions. If you have any last parting thoughts, happy for you to share them. If not, I can conclude.
Okay.
All right. Are you good?
I think so. Is there any other questions? We'll maybe wait like 5 seconds. Going once, going twice. So.
No, great. Thank you. We just got a thank you in, so that was very nice. So thanks for your time. We really appreciate it. And also, thank you for all of our attendees who asked questions today. We really appreciate your participation and think that the Q&A portion of our event is really interactive and really meant to ask questions that came to you as you were attending this webinar. If for some reason you were unable to ask a question during today's live event, you can feel free to follow up with a question after the event, and we can respond via email. And as a reminder, within approximately 48 hours after this live event, you can access this presentation on demand at intelligrated.com/on-the-move. You'll also receive an email in a couple of days with a link to this recorded event, as well as a link to our Connected Assets video to give you some more information about this offering in our Connected Distribution Center. So on behalf of Honeywell Intelligrated, thank you for attending today's On the Move webinar, and thank you to William Leet for being our presenter. We'd like you to please join us on November 12th for our next On the Move webinar, when Joe Corelli, our Vice President and General Manager of Lifecycle Support Services at Honeywell Intelligrated, will discuss strategies for achieving 99.9% uptime in meeting your critical business outcomes. We will be sharing registration information about this live event soon. Thank you and have a nice day.